desert of California, NASA tests an experimental rocket plane, the X-15. They want to put a man into space, and they're in a hurry.
Rockets were powering aircraft to higher and higher speeds. The X-15 had enough energy to zoom to altitudes above the atmosphere.
The X-15 flies so high, pilots experience weightlessness and look out into the darkness of space. But even at 600,000 horsepower, it would need to fly 4 times its top speed to put a man into orbit. The Soviet Union holds an early lead in the space race, launching the first unmanned satellite to orbit the Earth. To beat the Soviets, NASA must launch a man into Earth orbit. Only rockets can go fast enough, more than 17,000 miles per hour. They call the program Project Mercury, and rally a team of determined young scientists and engineers to figure out how to fly a military missile with a man on top.
Most of us came in from aircraft flight test. We knew nothing about rocketry, we knew nothing about spacecraft, we knew nothing about orbits.
Gene Kranz joins the flight directors team in NASA's earliest days.
So it was a question of learning to drink from a fire hose. We had to learn all about trajectories. I'd never heard the term retrofire, coming on down from orbit, getting a spacecraft back home.
No man has ever survived a vertical blastoff on top of a rocket. At first, even stuntmen are considered for the job.
There were suggestions they'd take people like Evel Knievel or race drivers or something like that. And then President Eisenhower just said he'd rather have it be military test pilots.
110 pilots qualify. NASA selects the top 7.
These, ladies and gentlemen, are the nation's Mercury astronauts.
The Mercury 7 astronauts become instant celebrities. The press follows their every move.
You knew these guys. You lived with these guys. You socialized with them. They were the story. Wallace Schirra made the best textbook flight of them all. Alan Shepard, extremely smart. Scott Carpenter, the first scientist astronaut. Gordo Cooper, the best pilot of the bunch. Deke, great human being in every way. Gus Grissom, engineering savvy. John Glenn, probably the most level-headed.
To carry the first astronauts safely into space, NASA designs a pressurized capsule. The one-man spacecraft replaces a nuclear warhead as the payload for a Redstone missile.
I saw a lot of rockets launched. I'd say that somewhere between 30 and 40% of them failed. A lot of them came up off the pad and went the opposite direction. Some of them got halfway off the pad and blew up. Some of them got to 10,000 feet and turned the other way and blew up.
We're looking at this thing and looking at each other and deciding we want to go back and talk to the engineers a little more before we go further.
Engineers make the rockets more reliable for manned flight. But doctors still aren't convinced the man on top will be able to function in the weightlessness of space.
There was grave doubt in about 98% of the medical community that the man could perform a task when flying at zero gravity, that he would have trouble seeing, that he would have trouble swallowing, he would have trouble breathing, he would have trouble talking. We had to prove to the medical community that man would survive in the first place.
It's not made public, but John Glenn, Alan Shepard, and Gus Grissom are on NASA's short list to be America's first man in space.
We are all very competitive. We want to get those first flights.
The rocket and capsule are finally ready to fly. But none of the astronauts are happy about NASA's choice. A specially trained chimpanzee named Ham will fly the next Mercury mission. NASA's medical team sends Ham as a final test that man can function in zero-G. Ham blasts off on a suborbital mission into space.
3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff.
While weightless, Ham's put through a series of tests and performs well. Physically, he's unaffected by zero-G. His mission proves man can function in space. He's fatigued, dehydrated, but generally in good shape. But doubts remain about the reliability of the rockets. And they still don't know who will fly first.
It had been a big mystery for a long time. Who's going to fly first?
The director of the Manned Spacecraft Center finally reveals his choice.
Alan Shepard was chosen to be the first because he was considered to be the smartest of the 7 astronauts. They felt if Alan on the first one, if anything went wrong, he was more apt to be able to analyze or fix or do or get it out of it.
After more tests and more delays, NASA still hopes to put the first man in space.
We have done everything we know how to do to make this as safe as we can make it. We're done with all the tests, so we stand around and look at each other one last time and ask, okay, are we really ready to light this candle? Eventually, the answer to that has to be yes.
Alan Shepard's suborbital mission finally has a launch date, May 2nd. But on April 12th, NASA receives stunning news. The Soviet Union puts a man into orbit and brings him back alive. Cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becomes the first man in space just 20 days before Shepard is scheduled to fly.
We were all very angry about not being able to fly as quickly as we could have, and we would have beaten Gagarin into space had we done that.
Al was not pleased at all. He was very disappointed that he was not to be the first spaceman.
May 5th, 1961, 2:40 a.m. Shepard's pre-flight medical. After 3 days of delays, the final countdown has begun.
He was a cool cat.
But Alan Shepard was an educated daredevil. Everybody was praying Alan could survive in space.
Board cutoff. Inboard engine fast. I'm in board cutoff.
It was very exciting, very frightening to see a man come out of the trailer that he was in, to look up at that vehicle, to ride the elevator up, and then wait for us to get ready to launch.
5:21 a.m. Technicians strap him into the capsule. Shepard's only link to the world is Deke Slayton, the mission's Capcom, or capsule communicator. In the Atlantic, the Navy prepares for Shepard's recovery. 45 million Americans watch the launch live. Local beaches offer a front row seat.
Everybody, including myself, came here. We came any way we could. Everybody was praying and pushing for Alan Shepard.
TM is